Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Virtual Science Cafe. I am your host. My name is Chris. I am curator for the SCCU Daily Planet Theater at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Your host every Thursday night for our science cafes, whether we're hosting an in person event there inside the museum or like tonight, we're doing it virtually right here on the internet just for you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. We've got a great show for you tonight, especially if you're a dinosaur fan or a fan of ancient life in general, because we've got one of the world's best, I'm going to say it, one of the world's experts in dinosaurs and ancient life. And I can say all those things because tonight's guest works with us at the Museum of Natural Sciences. Dr. Christian Kammerer is the research curator of paleontology at the museum. Christian, welcome to the show.
Hello, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for
Happy-
being here. Thanks for agreeing to do this virtually.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, wish we were both in our workplace, the beautiful Museum of Natural Sciences. But with situations as they are, happy to just be able to keep spreading the science out into the world.
Yeah, really appreciate it, and yeah, same sorts of feelings. How have you been? We haven't actually spoken since
Yeah, for
things
a little
turned
while.
out this way. Yeah, it's been a minute.
I've been doing all right. I have been keeping busy with all of my backlog of research and data that was collected in the past year, but have been, unable to go out and do my usual field work and collect new fossils. So
Hmm.
wondering, for next year, what will we do? Um, I had originally planned actually to be down working in South Africa at this time, where a lot of the fossils that I study are found. But obviously,
Oh
that's
wow.
that didn't happen. So hopefully, we'll be able to reschedule that for next year as well. But yeah, in the meantime, just trying to get a lot of older studies on very old fossils finished up and published. One of which we is out and we will be talking about tonight.
Yeah, you were mentioning before we got started that this particular discovery has been keeping you kind of busy lately.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's been attracted quite a bit of attention, which we were very happy about. I think I'm going to be talking a little bit later, sort of towards the end of the talk, about one species in particular, which is this very tiny relative of dinosaurs that really would have like fit into your cupped palms. A little sort of hopping critter that people have really taken a shine to. I mean, I think it would have been very cute in life, and we got some great art by very talented paleo artists to depict it. So yeah, happy for interest in actually one of the very earliest members of the lineage that would give rise to dinosaurs, not a group that often makes the nightly news.
Excellent, excellent. Well, before we jump in, I want to remind everybody watching that as we go through the presentation, and then when we move into the question and answer session after that, you can leave your thoughts and your questions and comments in the chat box if you're watching on YouTube, and down in the comments if you're watching on Facebook or livestream.com. Anywhere you are, wherever you're watching, let us know what you're thinking and let us know what you want to know more about. Once we get into the Q&A, I'll be grabbing the questions and posting those to Dr. Kammerer. Christian, show's yours.
All right, yeah, let's get into it. Let me pull up my screen here. All right. So yeah, so I'm going to be talking today about the very earliest part of dinosaurian evolution, what I'm calling dawn of the dinosaurs. Um, and this takes place in the Triassic period. So dinosaurs, they're actually not my main focus. It's a group that I've done some work on. Um, I'm normally working on the origin of mammals and sort of the pre-mammalian species, but am very focused on this time period, the Triassic, which is the first part of the age of dinosaurs. And it's fun, I'm happy to be able to talk a bit about some of my dinosaur work. Dinosaurs, they are the most iconic of all prehistoric animals. I mean, there's no doubt there. They're the centerpiece of most natural history museums, some sort of dinosaur skeleton. Um, Dinosaur science is a very active field in paleontology and in evolutionary biology. They have a lot to tell us about, uh, evolution, about ecology, about extinction. So there's a lot of scientific importance to dinosaurs, but they're also an indelible aspect of our popular culture. I think everyone is aware of this group from between having toys as a small child or cartoons or, blockbuster Hollywood movies. Dinosaurs are definitely, they've been part of the zeitgeist for quite a while and show no signs of slowing down. Indeed, the word dinosaur has taken on and it's sort of an additional meaning. It's become part of our lexicon in sort of common English parlance, albeit with a somewhat negative implication there. When we call something a dinosaur, it usually means three things that I think cover a lot of popular understanding about what dinosaurs are, which is that they are big, they are old, and they are dead. And in this talk, and want to get around some of those, maybe put some of those ideas to rest, so that understanding of dinosaur is not just something to slap on the side of something that you don't like in any given political cartoon. Uh, so it is true that dinosaurs were large. Many of them. They include the largest land animals that ever existed, but they weren't all giants, and we'll see that later on in the talk. Also, they are not technically dead, although many of the animals that we think of as sort of the canonical dinosaurs, things like T Rex, things like Triceratops, went extinct when an asteroid hit the Earth roughly 66 million years ago. It's now overwhelming scientific evidence that living birds are directly descended from theropod dinosaurs, and thus birds are living dinosaurs. So they are not fully extinct. They are indeed remain as abundant today almost as they ever were. There are over 10,000 living species of birds, which is quite a respectable number when you think there's only around 5,000 or so mammals, and we consider ourselves to rule the earth at this particular juncture in time. Um, Also, they're old, but they're not that old. They didn't exist. They're prehistoric. They're before human history, but they did not exist like before time itself. Indeed, if you look at sort of the grand scheme of things, indeed, humans have only been around a few 100,000 years as a species, as Homo sapiens, whereas dinosaurs are more than 200 million years old, which is much much more. But when you look at the entire length of time that the Earth has existed, which is over 4.5 billion years, um, the first thing I want to get across is that complex life in general has only been around for a small fraction of that time. So looking at this diagram here, younger things are towards the left, older things are to the right. So think of ourselves at the zero there, beginning of the Earth, all the way at the right. This little box here that I'm highlighting is really just the past 600 million years where complex life has existed on Earth. So these are, and when I say complex life, I don't mean like, humans or dolphins or something like that. I mean anything that we would even vaguely recognize as an animal. It's like going back to flatworms and jellyfish and sponges, just sort of like multicellular, organized plant and animal life. And this is what we call the Phanerozoic eon, the most recent eon in Earth's history. And so this eon is then broken down into three eras: the Cenozoic, the so-called age of mammals that we exist in; the Paleozoic, which had, featured the origin and evolution of fish, the origin of amphibians, the conquest of land by plants, things like that. And then in the middle here, the Mesozoic, meaning middle era, middle life actually, which is popularly known as the age of reptiles or the age of dinosaurs. And within the Mesozoic, I mean, dinosaurs lived throughout the majority of it, but they weren't around even for the entirety of this era. When we think of the dinosaurs that are probably most familiar generally, things like Triceratops, things like Tyrannosaurus or Velociraptor or like Stegosaurus. These are animals that lived in the Cretaceous and the Jurassic periods, which are really the times when dinosaurian diversity was sort of at its fullest, when there was a real flowering of adaptation of all sorts of shapes and sizes and ecologies of this group. If we go back to the beginning of the Mesozoic, this period, the Triassic, things are a lot more depauperate. There are not really, it's harder to name a good Triassic dinosaur. Um, Partially, this is because dinosaurs did not actually appear until fairly late in the Triassic. So the major evidence we have for radiation of dinosaurs is in the late Triassic, in these segments of the periods that are called stages, that include the Norian and the Rhaetian, which are around 210 through 200 million years ago. You start to really see dinosaurs take off. Before that, the dominant vertebrates on land were proto-mammals, so these ancestral groups, sometimes called mammal-like reptiles, although they're not true reptiles, and then other reptiles that were more closely related to crocodiles than to dinosaurs. Um, so if you are trying to like rack your brain for some Triassic dinosaurs, there are a few that were historically fairly well known. These are animals that were initially discovered in the 19th century and known from a lot of material. So there's this animal Coelophysis, which is known from the latest Triassic of mostly of Arizona and New Mexico, known from hundreds actually of specimens at places like Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. And then this animal called Plateosaurus, which is known from Switzerland and Germany in the late Triassic, uh, especially in the Swabian Alps in southwestern Germany, leading to its nickname as the Schwäbische Lindwurm, which means the earth dragon of the Swabian Alps. Um, and what's notable about both of these dinosaurs is that although they're primitive in some ways, they're clearly members of fairly well circumscribed dinosaurian groups. So Coelophysis is a bipedal predator. It's a member of this group, the theropods, that would go on to include animals like Allosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, Velociraptor, and eventually birds. So very clearly, early theropod. Plateosaurus is a member of another group, the long-necked dinosaurs, the Sauropodomorphs, that later on would include things like Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, these well-known giant herbivores. So they're already members of, discrete dinosaurian groups. Um, the real early, you know, primitive dinosaurs, things that, it's not really clear what group they belong to and may include some ancestors for the group as a whole, weren't really found until the latter part of the 20th century. So if we go for a moment down to Argentina, so at the southern tip of South America, in the foothills of the Andes, there is a site called the Valley of the Moon, which is in Ishigualasto Provincial Park in northwestern Argentina. One of the most alien and beautiful landscapes in the world, if you ask me. I've been around there looking for synapsid, these proto-mammal remains. Um, but it is better known for having the earliest true dinosaurs that we know of, which were found beginning in the 1960s or so. Excuse me. Things like Herrerasaurus here, which was first described in 1963 from Ishigualasto Park. And this is a very primitive dinosaur. It looks vaguely like a theropod. It is bipedal and carnivorous, but it shares kind of like a mosaic of features seen in theropods and sauropods, and actually may not even be a member of any of the major dinosaur groups. It may fall outside of those. The same is true for other more recently discovered things like Eoraptor, which was found a few decades later, also in Ishigualasto Provincial Park. And these animals, they show us sort of like what the earliest dinosaurs would have looked like. They're sort of mid-sized. They're not quite gigantic yet. Herrerasaurus maxing out at around 15 feet long. Um, and they're very generalized as these things go. Even more interestingly, however, if you look in earlier strata, so the rocks underneath where those dinosaurs are found, you find what are called Dinosauromorphs. So this is a much more obscure group of animals. These are found in the Chinares Formation, which is right underneath the Ishigualasto Formation in the same part of northwestern Argentina, slightly earlier in time. So this is the earliest Carnian is the stage. This is early late Triassic. Ishigualasto is later in the Carnian, and it has these very interesting, small-bodied, very sort of like light-boned, long-legged critters, like Lagasuchus or Lagurpaton here. Um, their inferred sort of activity and possible hopping behavior is inherent in the name, I should add. Lagasuchus means rabbit crocodile, and Lagurpaton means rabbit creeper or rabbit reptile. Um, and these animals are they're so dinosauromorphs are they're more closely related to dinosaurs than any of the other major groups. And to help sort of explain this, showing this evolutionary tree, a cladogram of the major reptile groups. So within reptiles, you have this group called the Arcosaurs, which is basically alligators and crocs on one side, and then birds and dinosaurs on the other. So within the Archosaurs, you have this bird line, which includes birds, which are within dinosaurs, and then also the flying pterosaurs. So these are things like Pteranodon or Pterodactylus, Rhamphorhynchus, the animals that were doing most of the aerial activities for vertebrates during the Mesozoic, at least until birds evolved later on in the Cretaceous. So within this bird line, you have dinosaurs, and then everything closer to them are Dinosauromorphs, and ditto pterosaurs, and everything closer to them are Pterosauromorphs. So this is some technical jargon, but it's going to be important for distinguishing between these very early ancestral forms to dinosaurs, the Dinosauromorphs, and true dinosaurs. So these things like Lagasuchus and Lagurpaton, they're Dinosauromorphs. They fall outside of the main dinosaur lineage. And I guess I should just mention that the reason they're not dinosaurs is Dinosauria is both defined as uh, you know a the meat-eating dinosaurs, the theropods, and the main plant-eating dinosaur group, the Ornithischians, and all of their descendants. And it's also diagnosed by this particular feature of the hip, which is a perforated acetabulum, which just means they have a hole in their hip socket, and that is distinct to dinosaurs. And these earlier dinosauromorphs lack that feature. Um, so these dinosauromorphs, the state of the art until fairly recently, until around the year 2000, was that they were only known from these few beds in South America, in Argentina, and a few similar things found in southern Brazil. And so this figure to the right sort of shows the state of the art until quite recently for these animals. So in the earliest beds are really only known in Argentina, and then there are some Argentine and Brazilian things known a little more recently. And then very late, at the end of the Triassic, you have this group diversifying around the world. And so you have things like Coelophysis in North America and Plateosaurus in Europe and other things in North Africa. But it was, very recent evolutionary event within the Triassic. Um, and this led a lot of scientists in the late 20th century to argue that dinosaurs and the Dinosauromorph lineage originated in South America. This was their center of origin, and then they spread out around the world. And so that was sort of like where we were in terms of the science going into around the year 2000, like I said. But then in 2003, this animal was discovered, Silosaurus. So Silosaurus is also a dinosauromorph, but it's one much more closely related to dinosaurs than to things like Lagasuchus and Lagurpaton. It was found in the late Triassic of Poland, hence the name. So it's from the region called Silesia uh, in Poland. And when this animal was discovered, it was known from almost complete skeletons. And these skeletons really provided a Rosetta Stone for understanding the anatomy of early dinosauromorphs. And as has happened actually quite a few times in Triassic studies, where historically there was, not maybe not as much research as on the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, not as many fossils being found, and very fragmentary fossils being found. For a long time, we didn't really know what certain fragmentary fossils were, and so Silosaurus showed us that whoa, actually, there are not just dinosaur morphs in Argentina. It turns out there are dinosaur morphs all over. We just were not recognizing them. So as it turns out, Silosaurids were living all around the world, and since Silosaurus was named, all of a sudden there's been this flowering of new discoveries, some of which are actually on very old specimens historically, not just old in terms of geology, but like things that have been known for decades or even 100 years were recognized as, oh, this is a Silosaurid now that we had a complete skeleton. So things like Sasisaurus from Brazil, Acelisaurus from Tanzania, Usilophysis from New Mexico. It turns out Silosaurids are all over. And I got in on this as well. This is some fossils that I described a few years ago. This is an animal called Diodorus, which is a Silosaurid known from assorted elements, but the most diagnostic of which are these chunks of jaw from Morocco. So this is from the late Triassic Argana Basin of Morocco. And you can see some of the outcrop in the picture on the left there. And what's interesting about this is that these rocks would have been contiguous with those of North Carolina at the time. So Morocco and the eastern seaboard of the US were more or less contiguous at this period because all the continents were united as a single supercontinent, Pangaea. And when I do local field work here in the Research Triangle area, it's the same sort of red Triassic rock yielding these sorts of vertebrates that you get in Morocco. Um, Another thing I wanted to note about Diodorus is the teeth. So if you look at that thing labeled B there, that is a sort of a blown up view of one of the teeth of Diodorus. And it's a very typical shape for an herbivore. So it has these sort of like rough denticles, these rough edges to it, kind of like the edge of a leaf. This very sort of like spade shaped morphology, which you see in iguanas today. And this suggests that these animals were herbivores, but it also tells us that a lot of isolated teeth, which in the Triassic that were historically called dinosaurs, we should not be so sure of that. A pretty notorious example of this is this animal Revueltasaurus, which is actually also known from here in North Carolina. Um, Indeed, I should mention that although the museum is closed now, if you were to go to the third floor fossil hall in our downtown location, you would see a small box on display that says Triassic dinosaur teeth from North Carolina. And for 20 years or so, these were thought to be the teeth of herbivorous dinosaurs. But we now know that some of them are these silosaurs. And in Revueltasaurus' case, it's not even uh, a member of this bird line. It's actually a close relative of crocodiles more than anything. So this dental morphology, the shape of these teeth, clearly evolved numerous times in the Triassic in different groups. So you can't trust just a single tooth to be able to identify these animals. So just an aside there, but to get back to sort of the main point for Dinosauromorphs, just in the past 20 years, there's been a huge expansion in our understanding of the diversity and the global distribution of this group, such that we now know that Dinosauromorphs were living all around the world. They were living basically everywhere in Pangaea, and they were not simply restricted to Argentina or to southern South America and diversified from there. Um, Another important addition to sort of the early understanding of dinosaurian evolution is the recognition of this group called Afanasoria, which was again based on one of these Rosetta Stone fossils. This is an animal that was collected in the manda beds of Tanzania, actually quite a while ago. First collected in the 1940s and 50s, but only described in 2018 by actually one of my colleagues and co-authors, Sterling Nesbitt at Virginia Tech. And this is actually an animal that is very strange. It doesn't quite look like a dinosaur as much as the Silosaurids or a Lagosuchus does. It's almost a more dragon-looking kind of critter. This is an animal called Crater, and Crater is the earliest and most primitive member of this whole bird line group that we know of. Um, and shows that ancestrally they were actually a lot more sort of crocodile-like than the more upright dinosaurs that we think of. And this makes sense given that the outgroup, the closest relatives of these are crocodiles and their allies. But this is just basically another rung in the dinosaur evolutionary tree that we've now fleshed out the non-dinosaur dinosauromorphs and their relatives to a much greater degree than at any time in paleontological history. So we have this group, the Afanasaurs right at the bottom, then pterosaurs, sort of the flying ones, and then all these different dinosauromorph groups leading up to dinosaurs. So where does my recent discovery fit into this? Well, for that, we're going to have to shift our focus a little bit around the world. So we've been jumping from Morocco to North Carolina to Poland, all over Argentina, and let's settle down on Madagascar, the an island, sort of a subcontinent in and of itself, off the east coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean. Famous, of course, today for its incredible mammal and bird faunas, lemurs, all sorts of incredible like chameleons. But it has a pretty spectacular fossil fauna as well. Um, and this is talking about some fossils that were found in the Isilou 2 beds, which are mid to late Triassic. So we haven't been able to date them radioisotopically yet. So generally, paleontologists, we use fossils to roughly correlate the age of different beds worldwide. Ideally, we would use radioisotopic dating. So if you're familiar with carbon dating, that's one example of it, where we look at the decay of radioactive isotopes to say precisely how old something is. But you need certain kinds of basically certain types of rocks. Volcanic rocks are the best in order to do that, and we haven't found them in Madagascar yet, at least of this age. Um, but based on the vertebrate fauna there, it's roughly mid to late Triassic. And these are beds exposed near Isilou National Park, which is another, just spectacular natural space in the world. Um, but these beds were intensively prospected by some colleagues of mine, John Flynn and Andy Weiss, in the 1990s, and they found this really remarkable fauna of Triassic animals, including a number of synapsids. These are the proto-mammals, including these various cynodont skulls. Cynodonts are the group that evolved into mammals, so some of our own ancient relatives in that group there. And then also these Arcosauromorphs, so members of this larger crocodile bird group there. Um, Now, one thing that we didn't get around to at first, and indeed sort of went unstudied for years and years, is this sort of bundle of bones that I'm showing you here. So these are some tiny little bones that were actually collected all the way back in 1998 when I was still in high school. Um, but and then we're hanging out in the American Museum of Natural History in New York for a couple decades. And then when I did my postdoctoral work there, we pulled these out, and I'm like, this is something interesting. This is something we should take a look at. So did additional preparation on them, and then sort of began the lengthy process of having to actually describe and study these, which also, it takes years and years to name a new taxon of prehistoric animal. You may think that, okay, you go out and you dig up a dinosaur and then you just look at it in the ground and say, okay, it's going to have this name, it's going to be something-osaurus, and then you write the paper. And that is not the case. It is a very lengthy and intensive process. Indeed, when you're thinking if you're going to give it a new name, which we did, you have to make sure that it's different from everything else that has already been found. So that involved like seeing all these dinosaur morph fossils in Europe and South America and in Africa, and like really holding them in your hand, making sure they're different. Um, But that all culminated in recognition that this specimen was a member of this group Lagurpatids. So Lagurpaton, I showed you before from Argentina, um, is this very sort of long-legged early Dinosauromorph, and then there are a few others that have been found more recently, like Ixlurpaton in Brazil and Dromamaron, also from New Mexico. But we found it was different enough from any of those based on the various features of the leg bone, the femur here, to be that it is something new. I mean, we expected it was, given that none of these leg rubbertids have ever been found in Madagascar, and even though all the continents were together as Pangaea at the time, this is still hundreds and hundreds of miles from where any of these other animals were found. Um, but good to have, solid anatomical data backing up our assertions there. And so we named it Kangunathon Kaylee, which means tiny bug slayer in the Malagasy language. So one of my co-authors on this work, Professor Luva Renivahaраmanana, is Malagasy, has been a real advocate for Malagasy science, and we've co-authored a bunch of papers on this Isalu fauna. Um, and then my colleague Sterling Nesbitt, also who mentioned earlier in the context of the Afanasaurs, he was also helping out with some of the histological work and a lot of the Arcosaurian anatomy expertise, because he's quite a maven on Triassic Archosaurs. Um, so the most notable thing about this animal is how tiny it is. So those limb bones that I showed you before indicate that the whole femur, so the main leg bone, would only have been around 4 centimeters long. So that's roughly 1.5 inches. So we estimate that this animal would have been able to fit inside your hand, as I mentioned at the beginning. Um, and this actually has a number of very interesting implications for the origins of dinosaurs, because it's such a tiny animal. And when you think about those other dinosaur morphs that were known, things like Lagasuchus and Lagurpaton, they're not as small as Kangunathon, but they are quite small, compared to like a T-Rex or something else. Um, and so what we did was we thought there was a pattern here, but to show that rigorously, we wanted to do statistical analyses and sort of evolutionary comparative analyses. So we ran an analysis of basically all of the body sizes in early dinosaurs and their Arcosaurian relatives, trying to looking at leg length as a proxy for body size. And what the results of this diagram are showing you is that we found evidence for a miniaturization event in dinosaurian ancestry. So the hot colors are small animals, the cold colors are larger animals. So the most giant animals are in blue, the tiniest animals are in red. So Kangunathon there, one of the smallest ones. But it's certainly not alone. A lot of these early dinosaur morphs are quite small animals. So it seems like the Archosaurs first evolved at sort of moderate body size, sort of similar to a modern caiman or a sort of a monitor lizard. And then they went through this bottleneck of extreme small size, this sort of overall kind of shrinkage of body size, before eventually, going through gigantism, like becoming some of the largest land animals ever as dinosaurs. And this is a very interesting pattern that we've picked up on. We think of dinosaurs, of course, as being, giants, but to have their ancestors potentially being, so small that, they'd have to be eating bugs rather than anything else, is really quite striking. Why? And that, like, it opens up questions as to sort of like why this would be the case. Um, Even sort of the earliest dinosaurs are not giant, but like if you compare Kangunathon to Herrerasaurus, one of these earlier dinosaurs, the difference in size between them is very striking. So why earlier in the Triassic are we not getting Herrerasaurus sized animals? And I think a lot of that has to do with what's going on in Triassic ecology. So mentioned at the beginning that there are these other groups, the proto-mammals, and also the this crocodile line, which includes both, the modern crocodiles and their Triassic relatives, things like Rawasuchians, Aedosaurs, this group Phytosaurs, which may or may not be within proper Archosaurs. But these were some of the dominant animals on land for something like 20 million years, and they were very good at occupying large-bodied niches. So Phytosaurs, for instance, could get up to 40 feet long. Rawasuchians almost as big. These were giant predators, and so most of the large-bodied carnivores, most of the large-bodied herbivores were in this croc group or in the proto-mammal group. So with these animals sort of occupying all of those roles in the ecosystem, being a tiny sort of hopping bug eater may have allowed the dinosaur lineage to radiate without having to compete with these other groups of reptiles. Um, and indeed, we know the dinosaurs benefited from the extinction of these other groups because dinosaurs really start to radiate and become sort of the dominant vertebrates on land in the beginning of the Jurassic, after the Triassic Jurassic mass extinction, which wiped out almost all of the crocodile archosaurs except true crocodiles, and wiped out almost all of the mammal-like reptiles, with only like mammals and a few other tiny groups squeaking into the Jurassic, and then only at like very small body size. So there was a vacuum in ecospace for dinosaurs to move in and take over. Another thing that is interesting about the small size of this is it helps inform the origin of flight. So it seems like flight can only evolve in very small animals. There are some big flying animals, of course, both like some modern birds like cranes or storks or eagles, and of course in the pterosaurs, some of which were as large as an airplane in the Cretaceous period. But if you look at the earliest members of the three flying vertebrate groups, which are bats, birds, and pterosaurs, all of them started out tiny. Things like Kanguniphon are close to the ancestry of both dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Indeed, they're so close to it, we're not entirely sure whether it is on the dinosaur line or the pterosaur line precisely. Um, but it seems like these early members of the lineage were all at quite small body size, and that's probably an important pre-adaptation, allowing pterosaurs to fly. So you start out being small in general, and then that small size maybe allows you to move up into the trees, maybe allows you to start gliding, and then eventually powered flight. It is very difficult to imagine how it would be possible to evolve powered flight at large body size. Like even if at a human size, it's nearly impossible for us to be able to like early aerospace engineers, when we thought about making things like ornithopters or human-based gliders, it's not possible just because our physically we can't handle it. Whereas if you take something maybe the size of a gecko and throw it off, I mean don't do this, but if you were to throw it off a second story uh, balcony, it would probably survive when it hit the ground. A light enough animal uh, can you know hit some air resistance. Maybe it glides a little bit, and that's the sort of thing that can lead to natural selection towards wing membranes and eventually powered flight. So small size probably an important prerequisite there. Finally, it is now well known, but this is another revelation that's really only come out in the last 20 years, that both dinosaurs and pterosaurs, many of them were fuzzy. So they had in the most bird-like dinosaurs, like this animal Sinornithosaurus, shown in the upper left there, they had proper feathers, like they had wings and feathers, like their descendants, the modern birds. But then there were also dinosaurs like Sinosauropteryx in the top right there that just had sort of what's called proto fuzz or proto feathers covering the body. Pterosaurs were also known to have been furry. So there's this animal, Yeholopterus, in the bottom right that is preserved with the fur on it. But there are plenty of other examples. So it seems that both dinosaurs and pterosaurs were fuzzy, and given that they are each other's closest relatives, it stands to reason that Dinosauromorphs like Kanguniphon and the Silosaurids would also have ancestrally had some sort of furry integumentary covering. Um, So, how is that important in terms of Triassic ecology? Well, when we think about the other group that has evolved at this time, which are the mammals, they are also, showing the origin of hair sometime. And the Triassic is a period that's known for its remarkable climatic instability. So, following runaway global warming at the end of the Permian, the Triassic was extremely hot by day and extremely arid, so a very desert-like environment in terms of sort of global trends. And when we think about modern deserts, they're very hot in the day, but they also can get very cold at night. And if you're a small-bodied animal, it can be very difficult to thermoregulate if you just have naked skin or scaly skin. So being able to have some sort of integumentary structure, be it fur or feathers, to trap that heat at night could be the difference between life and freezing to death for these things. Um, so I think it is not coincidental that the origin of dino fuzz or proto feathers and mammalian hair occurred at around the same time when both of these groups were undergoing a miniaturization event. I think this really does have something to do with the Triassic environment, and suggesting that animals like Kanguniphon here may well have been little fuzzballs. Um, and so with that, I will close up my talk and happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Christian.
Yeah.
Everybody, drop clapping hand emojis into the chat boxes for Christian, or wherever you're sitting watching. Big round of applause. Thanks so much. Um, in just a second, everybody, I'm going to turn to the Q&A, and I'll start grabbing your thoughts and questions out of that and posing them to Dr. Kammerer. But while you condense your thoughts and start typing, something that I'm curious about is in making this discovery of Kunguniphon Kaylee, you
Mhm.
showed us bones of two other species and then these unknowns. And you said by looking at the femurs and comparing them to the others, we could tell that these were different. But how do you know, even comparing them to other little tiny femurs, how do you make the determination that you don't have a juvenile creature or that you don't have a creature with some pathology or a broken bone that just gives it a slightly different shape and could lead you in the wrong direction?
Yeah, that's a very important consideration. And it's one that we especially had to look at in detail because so much of our argument for this paper was that it is a very tiny animal and that the dinosaur ancestors were ancestrally tiny. What if it's a hatchling? Those would be tiny. And yeah, this is something that we thought about, and this is where the histological work that my co-author Sterling did is really important. So you can basically cut open limb bones like you would a tree trunk and count the rings inside there. It's part of osteohistology, so the study of internal structure of bones. And so we did that for one of the other leg bones, the tibia of this particular individual of Kanguniphon, and saw that it was at least 2 years old, and it had started to asymptote. It had started to slow down to nothing its growth in the terminal layers. So it may seem like, oh, 2 years, that still seems pretty young to me, and it is for a human, but for actual small-bodied animals, that is well into adulthood. Like most rodents or birds are reproducing, are fully mature within easily their first year, if not first 6 months of life. So yeah, we think it legitimately is a tiny little critter that was probably fully adult at 2 years. And with the pathologies, that's more difficult to tell, but generally it should be clear that there are, like, if there's a tumor or something, or if there's a breakage, you can generally see in the histology almost always, but even just from the gross morphology of the bone. Um, the differences that we were seeing, which were things like the angulation of the femoral shaft, whether or not there was what's called the anterior trochanter and the fourth trochanter, which are basically just like bumps on the side of the femur. These are discrete features whose presence or absence is an affected by sort of disease or anything like that.
Got you. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to see what folks in the chat are thinking about.
All right.
The first question that we got is from Chuck. Wants to know, are there some dinosaurs that are related to lizards, or are all dinosaurs related to birds?
Yeah, all dinosaurs are related to birds. So the that family tree I showed early on, I didn't talk much about lizards and snakes, but they are even further out than crocodiles in their relationships. So birds are descended from theropod dinosaurs, and those are related to the plant-eating dinosaur groups. Then basically pterosaurs, then crocodiles, and then further out from that you get turtles, lizards, and snakes. So they are lizards and snakes are the most distantly related to dinosaurs of all of the living reptile groups.
All right, excellent. Let's see. Next question here was, what are some good books about the Triassic period?
Oh boy, there's all too little written about the Triassic, but there's a book by Hans Zeus, who is a paleontologist at the Smithsonian, about the Triassic, which is written for an advanced general audience, like not elementary school age, but definitely middle high school could be getting into that, and for the interested amateur, absolutely able to do so. I'm blanking on the exact title. I have since I'm not standing in the cafe
Right.
and have access to the internet, I can say, oh yes, okay, it's called Triassic Life on Land: The Great Transition. But yeah, that's actually quite a good book on the Triassic that I would recommend highly.
Do you have resources that you recommend for elementary or middle school students interested in ancient life, maybe dinosaurs or in particular?
Yeah, it is for Triassic stuff. It gets more difficult because as the animals get more obscure, the interest in producing general literature about them diminishes. And speaking as someone who has tried unsuccessfully to get publishers interested in like early readers, first proto-mammal books, there isn't too much out there. There's a book
Right.
series that does cover all of the Paleozoic and Triassic groups, which is written for young readers, which is called. It's. Let me think about this. It is. Give me just a moment.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions coming in about resources for educators,
Yes.
classroom teachers, maybe parents who are thinking about having to teach science at home.
Oh, for sure. Okay, yeah, I've got it. The series is called Earth Before Us. That's what I was blanking on. But they're actually a series. There's three books by the comic artist Abby Howard. One of which on the Paleozoic, one on the Mesozoic, and one on the Cenozoic. And I've read the Paleozoic one, and it's very good. And has a lot of great information on Permian and Triassic animals. So, yeah, Earth Before Us by Abby Howard.
Excellent. There you go, folks. There's you some resources that you can look up, dive into. Okay, let me see what else folks are thinking here. Okay, Tyler's wanting to know, how do such small dinosaurs deal with heat retention? Which I think you may have got
Deal with
to a
heat
little
retention?
bit. Yeah, heat retention.
Yeah.
And another question
Yeah,
was Kaylee homeothermic?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We don't know. So dinosaur metabolism is still quite controversial in some ways. So historically, scientists were trying to figure out, oh, are they warm-blooded or are they cold-blooded? But that's a very modern perspective on these animals that lived a long time ago. Because when you think about it, we only have like the tips of the branches of all of these lineages still around today. So we can say, yes, of course, we mammals are warm-blooded and lizards are cold-blooded. But if you go back to the dinosaur age, you're looking at a lot of intermediate things. So were dinosaurs and Dinosauromorphs more on the homeothermic side of things than a lizard? Almost certainly. Were they as metabolically active as a modern bird or a mammal? Probably not. Um, we know some of these animals were growing very fast, which does indicate high metabolism. So some of the histological work on other archosaurs and some of these proto-mammals suggests that they were growing as fast as almost any like modern mammals, possibly because they were living in these very damaged ecosystems, very resource poor ecosystems, following this worst extinction in Earth history at the end of the Permian, beginning of the Triassic. So you have to grow up fast and reproduce before just like the general awfulness of everything around you kills you. Um, so some of these would have been, pretty far along to what we would call warm-blooded. But again, I want to emphasize that it's a continuum between cold and warm-blooded. These are not either/or propositions. And so, in terms of heat retention, being partially homeothermic may be part of it, but then also this idea that they're starting to grow fuzzy integument in order to retain heat at night is definitely a part of it. And I should emphasize that we do not currently have any fossil evidence for fuzz on Kanguniphon or the other dinosauromorphs. That's again an interpretation based on the fact that pterosaurs have it, dinosaurs have it, so their common ancestor should also have it. Obviously, would love to find hard evidence, a complete skeleton with the fuzz in place, but none of those yet. Hopefully, in the future.
Excellent stuff. I'm going to take a question from Facebook now. What is
Mhm.
the earliest known dinosaur, and about how many species of Triassic fauna have been discovered?
Sure. So the earliest known dinosaur is also controversial. Uh, in theory, it's this animal called Nyasasaurus, which is actually found in the same region that some of these other ones, Silosaurus and Curator, were found, which is in the Manda beds of Tanzania. So this is putting it at the very start of the late Triassic, whereas even Herrerasaurus is a little bit further into the late Triassic. Um, so that's the earliest possible one, but it's known from very, very incomplete remains, just a few sort of fragmentary bones. So whether or not it's actually within Dinosauria has been subject to some debate. The earliest, like really well-known thing with complete skeletons are these dinosaurs from Ishigualasto, things like Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus, or animals from comparable beds in Brazil, like Staurikosaurus or Saturnalia. Um, so we haven't found like a really nice complete dinosaur any earlier than the late Triassic. In terms of Triassic fauna in general, I mean there are a lot of animals known. There are now a few dozen dinosaurs and dinosauromorphs. There's probably maybe in terms of the proto mammals just in the Triassic between 60 and 100. And then when you're looking at vertebrates in general, there are hundreds and hundreds, because there are all these fossil amphibians and other reptile groups as well, and tons of fish. So one thing that I haven't mentioned at all is what's going on in the ocean at this time, and there's actually a huge radiation in marine reptiles happening in the Triassic, uh, because dinosaurs, with the exception of things like penguins and a few other diving bird groups, they never became fully aquatic. Uh, they're not living out in the ocean. And that's because the oceans is like the one place where the competing reptiles were not displaced. So things like ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, marine crocodiles, they went through the Triassic, Jurassic, and continued to dominate the seas into the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. And so dinosaurs never really got the chance to go into the ocean. But there's a lot of these Triassic marine reptiles known also, in dozens and dozens of them. So there's quite a lot out there.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Gosh, there's a lot of questions coming in.
All right.
Lots of folks
We'll
like
try
their
to squeeze
prehistoric
them
critters.
in.
Yeah, we'll just keep going. Okay. Leah asks, why weren't dinosaurs as affected by the Triassic Jurassic mass extinction?
That's a important question because we don't know. So the Triassic Jurassic mass extinction, the current scientific thought on it is that it was driven by what's called the camp, which is a rather fun sounding name for a pretty horrific thing, which is CAMP stands for the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, which basically means that as North America, Europe, and Africa were pulling apart through plate tectonics, there was a massive bout of volcanism. So huge amounts of lava and like liquid hot magma being popped up into the surface of the earth and the atmosphere, both killing everything immediately there and then releasing, poisonous gases that were killing things around the world, changing the climate, all these other bad things. So we know that is what is killing off some of these proto-mammals and crocline archosaurs, but why it is killing them particularly and not dinosaurs remains a mystery. So there are several research groups that are working on this currently, looking at things like energetics. Were dinosaurs, were they better runners? Were they somehow better chewers? Was there something inherent about their anatomy that made them superior to the crocline archosaurs? But there's no answer on that yet.
There you go, Leah. Good question. Okay, let's see here. Were osteons found in the long bones? I guess the femur that you were studying.
Yes. So there are the actual, bone cells have long degraded, but you can see basically the little holes in the bone where the secondary osteons would have been in life. So yeah, we've actually, looked at these sections under, very high-powered microscopes, also using a series of different filters. So for example, some in histology, just looking at it with the naked eye with plain light, you're not going to be able to see anything. But if you put, different things, different filters of light through there, you can start to see some of these microscopic features.
Thanks. Let's see. Did any dinosaurs drag their tails?
So like historically, all dinosaurs were depicted as like these very sluggish, uh, sort of lumbering creatures that were dragging their tails along the ground. And then starting really in the 1970s in what was called the Dinosaur Renaissance, they were re-envisioned based on good scientific data as being much more active animals, many of which would have been holding their tails vertically, and we think, or horizontally rather. And we think most dinosaurs were not dragging their tails, but also keep in mind dinosaurs are a hugely diverse group. There would have been hundreds and hundreds of species of dinosaurs. There are some evidences of tail drags in the ichnological records. That's the footprint record. Whether or not that was habitual or not, we don't know. So I mean, I don't usually drag my arms on the ground, but sometimes when I'm moving around, my arm does drag on the ground. So if I was, if that happened when I was like at the beach, trying to get out of the water, and that track was fossilized as an ichnite, and future paleontologists found it, they would say, "Oh, okay, yes, these humans were dragging their arms on the ground all the time." So just because there's a tail drag track doesn't mean they always drag their tails, but also it doesn't mean that there are no dinosaurs that didn't drag their tails. So sorry for like hedging my bets a bit with that. I can say most dinosaurs we're now fairly sure did not drag their tails, but it's a hugely diverse group, so keeping the possibility open.
All right. Science keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. If pterosaurs are furred, would they not be closer to mammals than dinosaurs?
Yeah, so the nature of pterosaur fur, what are called these pycnofibers, was enigmatic. Like the fact that pterosaurs have some kind of hair-like covering has been known for quite a long time, at least since the 1970s. Um, and it was thought to be basically distinct from both fur and feathers. It was thought to be just its own thing. Um, but more recent examples from the Yehol beds in northeastern China has shown that at least some of these pterosaurs had branched filaments. So it's not just like our hair is a single strand, whereas a feather is made up of a bunch of tiny little filaments. So the new discoveries of this pterosaur fuzz seems to be more feather-like. So that also lends support to the idea that these are homologous, which is to say they're the same throughout the ancestry of pterosaurs and dinosaurs. Um, so they're definitely not closely related to mammals, though. And as for the like just being furry, I mean, the moths also have fur. The kiwi bird also sort of has fur. So just having simple stranded filaments is not an entirely mammalian thing.
All right. Let me see here. Okay, this is a good question. What kind of climate or climates did larger bodied dinosaurs evolve in? Maybe compared to the climate of the discoveries that you've announced here.
Yeah, so in we're going from these small body animals in the Triassic where things it's quite arid, things are hot but also generally dry worldwide, into the Jurassic Cretaceous is more sort of it's a greenhouse Earth, but it's broad tropical belts. So during the Cretaceous, for instance, you were getting fairly warm temperatures going up into what is now Canada, where you're getting, Triceratops and T Rex skeletons. Um, so overall, it would have been fairly warm, subtropical to tropical for a lot of the age of dinosaurs. But there were exceptions to that as well. So, like in China, where these feathered dinosaurs are found, there's paleoclimate evidence from the rocks there that suggested it could actually get quite temperate, and it may even have been like snowy in the winters in this part of the early Cretaceous, which may have something to do with why even groups of dinosaurs that we know, some of them are scaly, like beaked dinosaurs, for instance, show some fuzzy individuals there. We also have dinosaurs in the early Cretaceous from the Antarctic Circle, from what is now southern Australia, and you know, even in a fairly warm Earth, being in the Antarctic Circle would have gotten cold during some of the year. So I guess the answer there is that the Earth's climates have always been quite variable. In the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, it was probably warmer in general than it is in the Cenozoic. Um, Certainly, the development of sort of like massive forests with huge amounts of vegetable matter for these truly giant dinosaurs to feed on would have been an important factor in their rise to gigantism. But there were probably deserts, mountains, offshore islands, um, like a lot of the environments today. And unfortunately, a lot of those environments don't preserve fossils because you need to have sort of constant sedimentation in order to preserve fossils. So we'll never know a lot of the weirdest dinosaurs. They're like living on top of mountains or living isolated on islands. Their fossils were just never preserved.
Wow, that's wild to think about.
Yeah,
The diversity of life that we'll just never really know.
yeah, we have a very biased view of the fossil record. So we know a lot about animals that were living in lagoons, but probably, yeah, proportionally too much.
Okay, I'm going to rapid fire the last few because we're over time. I want to
Okay.
be respectful of yours too. How close are the media depictions of popular dinosaurs like T Rex and Velociraptor to the real thing?
Well, like if you're talking about like Jurassic Park stuff, not very at all. Like
Mhm.
Velociraptor in particular, very bad. We know for a fact Velociraptor had feathers. Like we have evidence of like both very close relatives with all the feathers preserved, and then actual Velociraptor skeletons that have the quill knobs on the arm of modern birds that show that feathers were there. T Rex is a case where the jury is kind of out on feathers. So we know Tyrannosaurs had feathers. Some of these Chinese ones I'm talking about, like Eutyrannus, have shaggy, sort of fluffy feathers all over the body. There is very little skin preserved for T Rex as a species. What is there is like a few little scraps of skin showing scales. Um, but then again, if you just had the leg of a modern bird preserved, you might say it was totally covered in scales. Um, the one thing about T Rex that does give me pause about going all in on, yes, all these dinosaurs were super fluffy. although I kind of want to believe that, is that it's very, very big. It's much bigger than the earlier tyrannosaurs, and heat retention in the opposite direction becomes a problem there. If you're really shaggy at large body size in fairly warm climate, you could get baked in your own skin. When you think about the largest mammals today, things like rhinoceroses, hippos, elephants, there's a reason they don't have lots of hair, why they mostly have naked skin, and it has to do with those heat retention issues. So T-Rex is, even heavier, bigger than an elephant, so may have secondarily gone back to a fully scaly body, but definitely had fluffy ancestors.
All right. Let's see. Earlier you were talking about Dinosauromorphs.
Mm-hmm.
What about Pterosaur Morphs?
Pterosauromorphs are the huge missing piece of the puzzle. So we don't know of any definite Pterosauromorphs. Basically, the earliest pterosaurs are fully pterosaurs. Like the earliest known pterosaurs, things like Eudomorphodon from the late Triassic of Italy. They look perfectly like a pterosaur, as if sprung from the head of Zeus. So finding pterosauromorph fossils is a huge priority for Triassic researchers. One thing I will note is that, as I mentioned, the Lagurpatids, it's not really clear. They're so close to the divergence between dinosaurs and pterosaurs, whether they're just like barely onto the dinosauromorph side or barely onto the pterosauromorph side. We don't have enough fossils of them yet to say for sure. Like, even though we have more and more evidence for a diversity of different species, from things like Congunophon, we don't have a complete skeleton of any one Lagurpatid. And until we do, we probably won't know unless it really is a dinosauromorph or a pterosauromorph.
This question came in, but I have it too, and it's a good one to wrap up the show. What are the next steps for the research?
Well, there are, in terms of the Madagascar fossils, there are a number of other ones still to be named and described. So we actually have some fairly exciting ones from deeper in Arcosaurian history, coming from these same sites, known from really beautiful fossils that we are working on describing right now. In terms of the bigger picture of dinosaur origins, so we've put out this idea of miniaturization, and now, basically I'd like to see that tested with more data. So that means both the discovery of additional Triassic animals to fill in the current gaps in the analysis, and also for other groups of scientists. We're not, by far, not the only group working on dinosaur origins. To look with other methods, look at sort of functional anatomy, look at even aspects of preservation, whether or not they buy the miniaturization hypothesis. So I'd like to get a discussion going on in the literature. Different groups of scientists are like, oh, is this real? Like, what's the evidence for? What's the evidence against? And try to get either more data to shore it up, or like really amazing new skeletons that show, oh no, the earliest Dinosauromorphs were actually gigantic and you were totally wrong. That would be equally exciting.
All right. Excellent stuff. Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was really a joy to talk about all this. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, anytime and probably every time, because we didn't get to a whole lot of questions about individual dinosaurs and their habitats and the climates. So we'll definitely have to have you back just for like an hour-long paleontology Ask Christian Anything.
Just a dino rap session.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll just rock and roll with the Q&A for 60 minutes. I think these folks watching at home wouldn't mind that, actually, based on the questions that have come in. So because there were lots of great questions coming in, I want to let everybody know that, Christian, there's a great resource online here on the museum's YouTube channel. There are broadcasts called Old News that Christian is a part of. So everybody, you can go look for those videos and actually learn about all kinds of prehistoric life. New discoveries and old, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we try to do, we'll be starting them up again with the start of the school year. So maybe at the end of this month, but certainly in September, if not now. where we talk about recent discoveries in the field of paleontology and dinosaurs, fossil mammals, all sorts of cool stuff.
So, if you want to know what's going on, everybody, you can go to naturalsciences.org, the museum's website. There you can see a calendar of events. You can click on the live virtual events link, see what programs are coming up, whether it's dinosaurs or more interesting stuff. There are a lot of resources available on the museum's website. So take some time, go through. If you're a classroom educator, there are resources available like distance learning programs from the museum, dinosaur educators that you can sign up to get classes from. So do that, naturalsciences.org. Also, you can follow the museum on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Natural Sciences. And if you're watching here on YouTube, you can subscribe to the museum's YouTube channel, click the bell to get notified. And then next Thursday, when we're going live with another Science Cafe right here at 7 o'clock, you'll get a notification to let you know to come join us for some great museum science content. I can let you know that next Thursday, we'll be talking with the museum's astrophysicist, Dr. Rachel Smith. We are going to use cool new software called OpenSpace, which is visualization tools to look at the universe, basically. We're going to learn about asteroids, comets, and their neighboring planets using OpenSpace and hearing from museum astrophysicists. So be right here, 7 o'clock on YouTube at the museum. And I hope that we'll see you there. And I hope you take care, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Happy Thursday, everybody. Christian, thanks again once more, and good night.
Yeah, have a good night.